In this video, I want to talk about this, the Sony FE 200-600mm f5.6 to 6.3G OSS zoom lens. Let's just call it the 200-600mm zoom and be done with it. Now, there are quite a few excellent reviews out there with lots of specs and performance testing, but in this video I just want to share my personal take on using this lens, and I'll show you some examples of what I've been able to get with it so far. Now, when we first moved out of the city early this past year, I got fired up about having a better lens for wildlife. If you've watched some of the videos on this channel, you might know that I switched to the Sony a7 III and the a7S III at that time, back in January, and I still had my Panasonic Micro Four Thirds system, but I really wanted to commit to full frame. And within the Sony system, my choice for a super telephoto was pretty obvious, the 200-600mm zoom. And I think this lens is perfectly situated for the needs of serious enthusiasts. It's capable of amazing results for a somewhat manageable price. At about $2,000, it has what I consider to be a pretty hefty price tag, but it's nothing like buying a $13,000 600mm f4 prime lens. But since $2,000 is still a lot of money to me, I saved a few $100 by getting this lens used, and then being committed to seeing the Sony thing through, I also freed up some gear money by selling off the Panasonic cameras and lenses that I had. And I'll probably have more to say about that in a future video, so stay tuned if you're curious about how that turned out, how I sold them, and whether or not I think that was a good idea. Now, picking up and looking at the 200-600mm lens, it's pretty big and heavy, but that's to be expected of a full-frame zoom lens in this range. One thing I can say is that it feels extremely solid and well built. The size is augmented further by this huge lens hood, but you can reverse it for storage, so that does help. Thankfully, this lens zooms internally so it doesn't trombone when you extend out to 600mm. Because the lens is large and heavy, it comes with this tripod collar. Now, using the tripod collar to attach the tripod to the lens instead of the camera body reduces stress on the camera mount. I like to put a quick release plate on the foot since I put these little Manfrotto quick releases on just about everything. It's not quite as sturdy as it would be if I was using the longer type plate system, but since I use this on everything, it works just fine. You just have to be careful when you attach and detach it. By the way, I'm using this little tripod for demonstration purposes only. It's not nearly sturdy enough for this heavy of a system. I normally attach this to the tripod that my a7S III is on right now. The foot can easily be removed from the collar, but I like to keep it attached because I like to use it as a handle for carrying the lens. While mounted, the lens can easily be rotated by loosening the collar. There are little dots on here to help you line it up for level shooting in horizontal and vertical positions on a level tripod. The lens also has loops to attach a camera strap, for the same reason as having the tripod collar. It reduces stress on the mount. This lens has a number of good physical controls. The focus and zoom rings are really nice and smooth, plus the zoom ring is very quick to use, going from 200 to 600mm in about a quarter turn. That makes acquiring a distant subject at 200mm and zooming into 600 for the shot lightning fast. The focus ring turns infinitely since it is a focus-by-wire lens, but with modern autofocus this isn't usually much of an issue. And when I've used manual focus on this lens, it has been very easy to control with the focus ring. There are three little buttons around the middle of the lens that are by default set for focus lock. Now, you can customize these from what I understand, but I haven't really found a need to change them from focus lock. The four little switches near the back of the lens control the focus and stabilization. The first is a simple on-off switch for autofocus and manual focus. The second switch is a focus range selector. For a long telephoto lens, limiting the range for the lens to hunt for the subject can make a big difference in how quickly the camera can acquire focus on the subject. And in some cases, it can help the camera choose the desired subject from amongst other elements in the same part of the scene. This particular switch has three selections: full range, which is the lens's closest focusing distance of about 2.4 meters all the way out to infinity. The middle selection is a range of 2.4 meters to 10 meters, and the last is a range of 10 meters to infinity. The bottom two buttons are for stabilization, or what's called optical steady shot. The first of these two is just an on-off switch, and the bottom switch is for the mode of stabilization. Mode 1 is for general stabilization, Mode 2 is for stabilizing side-to-side panning motions, and Mode 3 is for more erratic motion like fast-paced sports. The stabilization works well on this lens, and you really need it for handheld shooting, especially when you're out at 600 millimeters. I use Mode 1 most of the time. I've had the 200-600 for several months now, and it's been great. The image quality is very nice, it's very sharp, and the bokeh is nice and smooth. It's already elevated my wildlife photos, and it's a lot of fun to use. Since I mostly use it with the A7 III, I think some ways the lens is capable of performing at a higher level than what I'm experiencing with this combination. The A7 III produces sharp images, but I think the lens is even sharper than that. The other area I notice is autofocus. I think the lens would be a lot snappier if it was attached to an A9 or even an Alpha 1. I've occasionally used it with my A7S III that I'm filming on right now, and even though I prefer to only shoot video with that camera, I can tell that the improved focusing on the camera would be an advantage in stills. I'm hoping for the arrival of the A7 IV with that improvement at some point in the near future. But having said that, I can't complain about the results that I've been getting with the 200-600 attached to the old A7 III. It's just a bit limited for fast subjects like birds in flight. Now with that variable aperture of 5.6 to 6.3, I use this lens wide open most of the time, and even wide open I think the images are pretty sharp and there's no discernible vignetting. Here are a few examples of what I've gotten with this lens so far. I've been primarily shooting photos of birds on our property. The hummingbirds nest in bushes right next to our house, so I was able to stake out some of their favorite flowers and catch them feeding. In addition to the hummingbirds, we have a number of other birds around here that like the lower bushes and trees near the house. So I've just basically been able to walk out the door and get good photos of a lot of different kinds of birds like cardinals, mockingbirds, house finches, and just a whole lot of different ones. Aside from all the birds around here, we have a lot of other interesting critters to take pictures of. I put this lens on my A7S III to get some video clips of the hummingbirds around the feeder near the house. All the goodness of this lens shines right through in video just like it does in stills. I use normal focal lengths a lot in what I do, but I have to say that this lens is probably the most fun lens that I have. I really enjoy being able to reach right out to those skittish varmints and to get some images that have compression that seems just a bit surreal. I haven't had the opportunity to make direct comparisons with other brands and systems, but for a Sony user, this thing is a home run. It feels like a good affirmation for having chosen the Sony system in the first place. And I'd like to hear what you think about this lens or any of the competition, so leave me a comment down below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I try to reply to every reasonable question. And as always, click like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.